There we go. Hi. Hello. Oh my goodness. So many fun faces today. This is great. Hi, Alex. It's all good. Keep video and mic off, video and mic on, whatever feels good for people. Hi, Evelyn from Germany. Hi, Vicky from Germany. And Bethany from Seattle. This is great. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited for today. I have been dreaming up talking about frameworks for a while. I just realized it's like something I do so often behind the scenes with my clients that I was like, you know what, it's time to talk about this more because I know people have so many questions about it. Finette's here from France. Bonjour. All right. So we're just going to give it a few more minutes, see who else is going to be trickling in. And just while we're waiting to see who else is going to join, if you have any kind of particular questions around frameworks that you're really hoping that I get into, feel free to pop them into the chat. How this kind of works for course cafes is like, I talk a little bit and then I leave a little bit of time for questions and then talk a little bit more time for questions. But this is super, super casual in the sense that you are allowed to interrupt me at any time. That's why I love the raise hand feature on Zoom. So if I'm talking about something and you're like, wait, I have questions right now and I don't want to wait. If you're like, I want you to share more examples or like, let's talk about how this relates to me and my situation, we can 100% do that. That's why I love hosting these on Zoom, because for all of you that are here live, you can get your questions answered right in the moment. You can share what you're working on and we can really like workshop how it applies to your specific situation. All right, and we've got Paola here from Wales. And it is totally okay to be silent. Really, these course cafes exist exactly how you want to. So if you want to keep your camera off, that's totally fine. If you want to be silent, that's fine. If you want to have your camera on, also fine. It's all good. I know sometimes with these types of live calls, especially if you haven't met me before or it's new, it can feel a bit intimidating to be like, wait, I have things I want to say. So it is always fine just to kind of like sit here and exist and kind of listen. And then if you feel like asking questions, also fine. So we're all good here. And Vicky is 100% paying attention, but eating dinner. So yeah, I hate eating on camera. I totally get that, where you're like, just no one watch how I eat this salad. I just want to keep my camera off. Okay, well, I think we can just get going right away. We have so many fun people here, a few people sneaking in. Hi, Sandy. Oh, this is so fun. Okay, great. So let's get started here. So today is all about frameworks. And I'm super excited to be chatting about this because I just noticed that frameworks, signature methods, it's one of those terms that just gets kind of thrown around the online entrepreneurship world. And I wanted to dive in more about what that means and what does that look like and what exactly are they and how do we create one? Because I know, especially when it comes to creating online programs, whether it's a group program, a course, a certification, we can be thinking about like, there's always all the things, right? It's like, oh, do I need to have a framework? Do I need to have a method? Do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? And so I want to kind of demystify how I think about frameworks and how you can use them. And also being able to chat with you about, do you need a framework? Is it the right fit for you? How does it work with what you are focusing on, what you are building? So I noticed that the Paula says, I have a framework, really looking forward to this. This is great. If you already have a framework and you want to kind of like get feedback on it, you can kind of let me know in the chat. If you don't have one yet and you're like, I want to know how the heck do I do this thing? You can also let me know. This is great. So what is a signature framework? A framework, often I find in the online space, is boiled down to a method. People often talk about, oh, I have my signature coaching framework, I have my signature method, I have my signature process, and they tend to get blended together. And while a method or a process can be a framework, it can be one way of having a framework, it is not the only way. And so really what I want to talk about today is moving beyond the linear framework. Now, depending on your subject matter expertise and kind of what your course is about, it may be linear for you. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. but I want to give other possibilities, other ways of thinking about how we can add depth into our frameworks so that not only do they set us apart from other people and really elevate us into thought leaders, but also it has such a deeper impact for our learners as well. And Paula, the call's roughly about an hour and a little bit. We have lots of friends on the calls today, so it might go a little bit over. So that is no problem. And if we run out of time, you can always message me on Instagram too, and we can chat after the call. It's totally fine. So a framework really, this is going to sound so silly, it provides a framing to the work that we do. And you can look at it as an underpinning. It is a supportive structure that kind of wraps around and holds the transformation that we are providing. You can look at it as an overpinning structure, a lens through which we look at our work. Or you can look at them together kind of like a framework hamburger, holding everything together. And when we're thinking about these frameworks, this structure that is holding this transformation that we're offering to our people, the first thing I want you to do is not think about your program. Don't think about your course. Don't think about your group program. Don't think about your workshop, because your signature framework, your framework transcends that. It is something that is a signature. We actually think about what that word means. Our signatures, when we're signing our contracts, we're signing our autographs because we're internet famous, that is unique to us. No one else has that. And in the same way, when we talk about our signature framework, that is unique to you. That is your intellectual property. That is how you think about things. That is how you teach things. And so that's not limited to just one course. That is going to be infused into everything in your offer ecosystem. And so as we are kind of thinking about our frameworks, I don't want you to worry quite yet about how does that translate into a course? How does that translate into a workshop? We're going to talk about that. We're going to start by kind of, this kind of general introduction to frameworks. Then I'm going to walk you through kind of the different components that your framework needs to have. I'm going to show you a whole bunch of examples and kind of how I think about it. We're going to have tons of time for questions. And then I'll talk about how do these frameworks actually get translated out into your offer ecosystem, into your courses, into your programs. But I find that when we start, if we are already trying to think about but how would I teach this in a course? What would this look like? Oh, my framework has 5 components, therefore I'd have 5 modules in our course. We're already limiting ourselves. We're already pulling ourselves into this kind of linear chronological structure, whereas frameworks can have so much more depth. So in general, I find that there are 3 kind of types of frameworks, and sometimes we blend these together. So we can have a methodological framework. So this is where we see my signature method, my signature process, which is, these are the steps that I do. These are the action steps that I take. Again, it tends to be relatively linear, but it doesn't have to be. We can have a conceptual framework where it is, these are the kind of zones or the areas or the themes that I focus on in order to guide you towards a transformation. And we can have a philosophical framework, which is this is the philosophical or the didactic lens that I take in my teaching. This is the lens through which I look at things. And we see philosophical frameworks showing up more in programs and certifications, and especially in academic settings where we are saying inherently based on my identity, based on my existence, based on my worldview, this is the lens I am bringing to the experience. These are the theories or the philosophies that I'm infusing into what I'm teaching. And so when we think about there being kind of methodological, conceptual, and philosophical frameworks, and often there's little bits of everything in what we are doing. We can have, a method that has concepts and philosophies in it. We can have concepts that has little methods woven in. Again, you'll notice the kind of themes is nothing I do fits into boxes that neat and tidy, because I just don't believe as humans we fit into boxes that neat and tidy. And my goal here is always to give you options, to teach you how I think about things so that you can kind of pull from it to be able to create what works best for you. Also, if you hear a funny noise, one of my cats is in the office and he's looking like he's about to knock a whole bunch of stuff over. So I'm hoping that he doesn't, but that might happen. So any questions so far about what I've shared, what we're going to talk about, what we're going to learn today? Just want to kind of check in before we really dive into components around frameworks. You're welcome to use the raise hand feature, or you can pop it into the chat if you have any questions so far about what I've shared. Good. Vicky says, great so far. Paula says, ditch dinner, I'm here. Okay, great. All right. Perfect. Okay, so oh, Nikki, I see you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
No.
No? Okay. So I have to check in. Sometimes I see when people unmute, I'm like, okay, just in case. Perfect. All right. Let me just get this cat out of one thing. One moment. It's amazing what they find when you don't want them to find things. Okay. Should we steer all of our content towards the framework, Paula? Yes. So really, when it depends on the kind of level of framework that you have. But what I love about frameworks is that, again, they are your intellectual property. This is really what sets you apart. This is where you're really saying, like, this is my thing. This is what makes me different. This is what stands out. This is what is recognizable. And frameworks, again, when we think about them as a structure, we think about them as literally like a framework around what we are doing. They hold everything. They hold our work. They hold the transformation. And so when you can show people with like thinking, I'm assuming you're kind of talking about like your free content, like social media or blogs or that type of thing. You are now being able to say, like, this is how this fits into the work that I do. This is how this, relates to this transformation. And my signature framework has 4 parts, oh, in my signature framework, I dive more into this, which you can find out about here, here, here. It gives an orientation, it gives an anchoring. It really helps people be able to see, like, how does this fit into what you were talking about? So you absolutely can steer your content towards a framework. That doesn't mean every single thing you post has to be like my framework. Like, you're allowed to talk about other things. You're allowed to bring in other elements. Absolutely. But especially if you're seeing like, oh, there's these little threads that I can tease out, it can be a great way of like showcasing this framework, especially if your framework has a gorgeous visual, which we are going to talk about how you can represent frameworks visually. Bethany.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, for sure. Go for it.
So could you kind of think of your business as having a framework, like maybe like a philosophical framework for everything that you provide?
Absolutely. Do you want to tell me more kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, so I do holistic fitness, and so kind of everything that I provide fits into this mindset plus habits, with movement and breath work. And it is kind of like a whole philosophy around, here's how we have more energy in our daily lives, right? So I'm kind of wondering if that's fitting with the framework theory.
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% exactly where we're headed to talk about things. That's, with your business, the work that you do. And this is what I love about frameworks is, I always approach things through the lens of like scalable programs. So courses, program design, all that good stuff. But really, when it comes to a framework, you can use that in one-to-one work. You can use that like in person. I mean, you could even have that like if you were a brick and mortar business selling products. Like, there's so many different ways where it could show up. And it's such a great, concise way of going, this is how I think about things. This is how I do things. This is what I believe in. It has a very intentionality behind it. And so what we're going to talk about next is kind of what are the components of a framework, and we'll be able to dig into that more, because exactly like you said, being able to say like, okay, this is what I believe. This is my philosophy of like, these are the components that you need. And this is why we talk about it. So 100%. I love that. Great question. And Paula asks, you have no fear about sharing the framework freely. What do you share for free and what do you not? So my philosophy is, in general, I share pretty much everything. I don't really like hold back, especially with frameworks, because again, like, I like to think about it as like in an academic setting, you're always citing your work. You're saying, oh, I'm using this person's method. I'm drawing from this person's experience. I'm doing this, that, or the other. And when you have a framework and it's branded and it's associated with you and you are sharing it, it almost positions you ahead to be like, oh, if someone wants to reference this, if someone wants to steal this, like it's going to be noticeably mine. Again, it's the signature, it's your thing. And yes, are there like horrible humans out there who like to steal your stuff and take your name and your branding off of it and pass it off as their own? 100%. It's going to happen. It sucks. It's happened to me. But you just have to kind of be like, oh, I guess I've really made it if people think I'm so great, they want to steal my things. But also if it's not about necessarily the fear of something being stolen, and it's more about the fear of like, what if I give too much away for free and then people don't want to sign up? I've never had that be an issue. I find, for me, I like to give like so much for value so people can think about, like, can learn how I think about things and learn about my vibe. And really the only reason I can't share more is often just because of time. For instance, even like in this course cafe, we have an hour. So in an hour, I'm not going to be able to teach each and every one of you, like all the way start to finish, how to design your own signature framework. And I'm going to answer every question that I possibly can. I'm going to teach you all the things that I can. And knowing that if it's something that you want my support more around, it's something that you want my support more around, like bringing it into your programs, that's when I can go like, well, you probably like might find the incubator's a great fit, or you might want to work with me one-to-one. So I always find that like the more that you share, the more that you can show like, this is how I think about things, the more that your people are going to resonate with you and go like, yeah, if it's not a yes right now, it's going to be a yes later. I don't think anyone's going to be like, wow, that person's just like so helpful. I'm just never going to sign up for anything from them. Never had that issue. Okay, I'll get to your next question in a little bit here. So let's dive into the components of a framework when we're thinking about it, and then we'll have more time for questions. So with a framework, I like to think about there being kind of 3 elements or 3 components to when we're designing a signature framework. So the very first, and arguably the most important, is having a very defined outcome or purpose to the framework. So why are we having this? It's not just to say like, oh, here's a bunch of things and they're organized, or here's a cool acronym, or here's a cool diagram. The goal is to be able to say like, this is the transformation that I am known for. This is the thing that I am helping you with. And so this might look like, this is, our framework to get you to like a holistic and integrated fitness lifestyle. This is the framework for how to become a powerful leader. This might be our framework for teaching you how to become a productivity master. Often it's a framework for who do you want to become? What do you want to be able to do? What do you want to create? My framework for, designing a powerful, life-changing program. What are people walking away with as a result of your framework? And so this is where we want to get really, really clear on the outcome. Because if we're not sure where we're leading people, if we're not sure the purpose of the framework, the next steps are going to be very, very challenging. And so this is where I invite you to really sit and think about like, what's the outcome? Like, what's the purpose of this framework? What am I leading people towards? And so as you're kind of sitting with this, and as I go into the next few elements here, you're welcome to share in the chat if you want to, in terms of, I think this is what my framework is going to be about, or this is what it already is about. This is what I'm leading people towards. You're welcome to share. You also don't have to share if you don't want to. That's also totally fine. You can let me know kind of, what is it? How do you help people? What's the transformation? What's going on there? So once we know kind of what our outcome, our transformation is, and this outcome and transformation, sometimes when we say transformation, it can feel like it has to be this like huge thing, like, oh my gosh, this person's going to become like the most like incredible human being ever. And sometimes it might just be like, this is my like framework for like having like the most organized house ever, because I'm a productivity and organizational, expert, something like that. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be this like huge epic thing. That's okay if it's not. But knowing that whether it's like this huge, big inner lifestyle shifting transformation, or it's something like smaller and practical and tangible, it's still so valuable to your people. So getting clear on what is that outcome of that framework, of your framework, what is the transformation? From there, we want to have quantifiable elements. So these often look like concepts or steps or stages. If you're kind of going more methods, it's an order. It can look like skills and abilities or mindset shifts. But the key thing here is we need to group them into quantifiable sections, because one of the main things that we want to do with our framework is we want it to be sticky. We want people to remember it. We want people to be able to hold it in their head. And if you have an 18-step framework, if you have a list of 32 action steps for people to be able to get to that organized closet, like no one's going to remember that. So the goal here is we want to come up with quantifiable elements, quantifiable groupings. And ideally, we want to distill them down into like 3 to 6 categories. Don't really like to go beyond 5. There's some wiggle room depending on what you're doing. But in general, we want to kind of try to create these groupings. I've gone as high as 7 is also fine. The more you get, the more you're going to have to be very like explicit in reminding people what they are. You're going to have to come up with like a real good acronym or something like that to help it stay in people's minds. Because from there, you can totally have sub-elements. It's totally fine to break it down to say, like, these are my large chunks, and I've got some little tiny pieces within them. But again, we want to be able to say, these are the quantified elements of this framework. So let's see here. Katrina is sharing about their framework. Let's see here. So I'm a career break and sabbatical coach. I have a more general framework, RSVP, for creating a life-changing break, but I also have a roadmap with 7 elements for planning a break, the break blueprint. Which should I consider as my main framework? Such a great question. So it's also totally fine to have more than one framework. Like, I know like some people might be like, no, it's a signature, you need to have one. But one of the things that I like to look at is how to tell the difference between a framework and what I refer to as a cognitive cueing structure. I call them cogs just because it's like, otherwise it's very like a mouthful. And like a cog is like, we often see these with acronyms or like little like named things that we teach, where it's a tool or a thing to help people remember the concept that we're teaching. It's not necessarily like an overarching like structure that is supporting our transformation. It's not something that like, if you think about like, oh, if I were to certify people in my framework, would this show up as like one of the main things? Versus like a cog is more like, oh, this just helps me teach this concept. So for instance, in one of my courses, I refer to as the 4 horsemen of the course apocalypse. It's like a little cog to help you think about like the 4 biggest issues that often pop up that make a course not successful. That's not really a framework. It's just like a little like teaching tool that I have. And so when we're looking at like, oh, which one's my main framework? The first thing you can do is go, is this actually like an overarching like kind of structural framework, or is it more of like a cog that's just kind of a little spark to help people remember something, to help people like learn and have it kind of stick in their brain? So kind of coming back to your question, Katrina, about having this general framework, RSVP, for creating a life-changing break, and then 7 elements for planning a break. I'm almost wondering if what you may have is like your framework that includes both of those. And so if you really start to kind of tease out like the life-changing break, creating a life-changing break, is the transformation, does that include the planning as well? And so the break blueprint might be something they create along the way. And within your kind of structure of your framework, you're like, we're going to plan it, we're going to create it, I'm going to have like the blueprint to help you. So I'm wondering if they're actually maybe merged together into like a framework that holds all of it. Let me know how that lands. Yeah, so yeah, the RSVP and P is for plan. That's perfect. Yeah, so it kind of just tucks right underneath there. So this kind of leads me into my third piece around the components. So we've talked about having some sort of outcome. So in Katrina's case, we've got that life-changing break. We've got quantifiable elements. So it sounds like, Katrina, you've got 4 in there with the RSVP. And then the third piece we have is, how do those elements relate to each other? What is the relationship? What is the hierarchy? How do they interact? So is it a process like they're linear, 1, 2, 3, 4? Are they hierarchical? I can never say that word right, where it's like they kind of, one's more important than the other. Do they nest? Do they stack? And so this is in a moment here, I'm going to share my screen to show you some visuals to help kind of get the juices flowing around, like, how do we think about frameworks and how do we start thinking about the relationship between them, so that if we're like, I don't feel like it's quite linear, like that doesn't feel quite right for me, we can look at our other options. And I'm seeing here, Paula is sharing about being holistic cat specialist. Respect framework helps cat parents build an extraordinary life with their cats using positive training and natural remedies. Oh my gosh, I love this. That's amazing. As you can tell, I'm a cat person and a dog person. I've got a dog too. That's amazing. And I love that respect already has like the acronym in there. That's awesome. Super, super great. Okay, so let me just pull up my screen here and show you some ways of visualizing frameworks. So I'm going to share screen. Here we go. Zoom always in the way where I don't need it to be in the way. There we go. Okay. So this is some examples of how I think about visualizing frameworks. And so, as we know, we've got our goal, we've got our outcome, we know what we are working towards. And then we have our quantifiable elements, at least our larger groupings. Like I said, it is totally fine to have sub-elements to be able to explain things a little bit better, to have abilities associated with different groupings. But in the case of these, you can see, like, for instance, linear process, I just represented it like 1, 2, 3. A lot of these I tried to keep between 3 and 4 just for the sake of easy visuals. But what we want to think about is, now that we have these groupings, now that we have these various elements, what is the relationship between these elements? What is the relationship between what comes first, what comes second? How do they like relate together? How do they move together? How do they interact? And so when we are thinking, I'm just going to move the chat box so I can like see what I'm looking at here. This is what I like to kind of do, is ask myself, like, if I were to teach people this, like, what order would it go in? Do all things hold equal importance? And this is where I really want you to trust your judgment and trust your intuition, because very often as you're sitting with it, you'll kind of get a sense of like, this is more important than the other one. This isn't quite as important as this. Or like, yeah, I think it's linear, or I think it's this, or I think it's that. Now, obviously, some of these are going to feel more obvious than others, especially if you have like a signature method or a signature process, then you're probably going to be drawing from the process ones. We've got the linear process, we've got the cyclical process. We have these things where it's like we are taking our elements and they go in order. Very linear in that sense. And then the main difference, obviously, between linear and cyclical is, do they repeat, or is it kind of like start at one end, go all the way to the end? With the other ones, this is where it's going to take a little bit more massaging, but this is where we can really start to add more depth into our framework, where it's not just what we're doing, it's how we're doing it. And this is where I invite you, especially even if you're thinking about processes or methods, where if some other coach or some other consultant or some other person out there had the exact same steps as you, how would you be different? And I know the first answer is, I wouldn't be. Like we're all doing the same things. Like it's very so similar. Like, I think we can see that a lot with like, oh, if I'm like teaching you how to build a sales page, or I'm teaching you how to do this or that, it's like, oh, the process is kind of the same. And it's like, but you're not the same. How you think about things is not the same. And this is where often I find what's hidden in our frameworks, that if we just think about our like process steps and we don't think about anything else, it's missed. It's, how do you think about things? What are those little mindset shifts, or the energy or the intentionality that you bring into the experience? The kind of hidden pieces that you're not necessarily bringing to the surface as much. So this is again where you can think about, how are they doing these steps? How are they engaging with these concepts? Are you actually bringing mindfulness into it? Are you bringing awareness into it? Are you bringing an intersectional feminist lens into it? Are you bringing a anti-diet culture lens into it? Whatever it may be, whether it's like philosophical, worldview, values-based lenses, whether it is hidden kind of meta habits that you're having people develop, where you're like, I want to bring in more reflection or this or that. Really starting to tease it to the surface of like, what are those components and how do they interact with each other? How do they engage with each other? What hierarchy do they have? And sometimes there isn't a hierarchy or a process, and that is totally okay. That's why I have this pillars visual here to represent that. Like sometimes you're like, I've got these 4 things. They are equally important. They show up in all sorts of different orders. And it's not just one and done sequence. It's not a one and done hierarchy where, like, you know, with the pyramid here, where we have something that forms the foundation and then we build on it to the top, or like concepts that overlap that are equally important and they all kind of merge together. Or we've got, you know, quadrants and axes here where it can be potentially spectrums or ranges or dividing things into 4 focal areas. Thinking about, again, how many groupings do I have and what is the relationship between them? So we just talked for a while there. I want to check in and see, what questions do you have? You're welcome to use the raise hand feature, or you can come on mute and just start talking. I'd love to check in and see what questions do we have so far. I hear someone off mute, but I can't see who it is. Might go. Yes, Paula, go for it.
I'm sorry. It looks like I'm clapping, but I wasn't meant to clap.
That's all good.
I was meant to raise my hand. Right. Anyway, I will find out how to get it clapping away. Anyway, so yeah, my question is, I have this framework, which I love my concepts, and they are all there, and they are comprehensive, and they sort of go into each other. But I'd like the word respect to be visible as a linearly, but sometimes I would like to cluster them differently, so not in a linear way. So I'm struggling showing the visual so that I can still see the word forming, but at the same time I can cluster things differently. So yeah.
Absolutely.
At the moment it's a circle, and every slice is an element, and then in the center there is one element, and in the outside there is like a halo, if you wish. So
Yeah.
the main element is 7 elements, which form the word respect, and then there are these 2 things. One is on the outer and one is in the center, but yes, the main thing is 7 elements, and they're like slices of a pie. But yeah,
absolutely. So with those elements, because I know you said like they're kind of linear, but they're not really linear, and like they kind of show up in different ways. Are there some that have to go in a certain order? Can they be done in any order? Like, talk to me a bit about the elements, and like, if you were walking someone through it, is it kind of like, oh, we start with R, or actually, like, even though it spells respect, we actually start with like PC, and then we do this or that? Like, talk to me a bit about the relationship between them, and like, if it's like, oh, this one is the most important, and then these ones come, or something like that. Just like, talk to me a bit about it.
Okay, so I would say that the first 2, which is R and E, they are around time and space. So it's the rituals and the environment, and they are the base of everything. So basically, yes, they would stand at the base of the bond and the relationship and the potential between a cat parent and their cats. And then we move on to nutrition and supplementation, which are the 2 that go into the foundation of nourishment, and basically, yes, the foundation of nourishment, and they are at a very like a more advanced level. I think nutrition could still be a basic, like at the top of the basic level, but it starts to be more advanced. And then definitely the supplemental level is more advanced. It would be, the next level. And together with that, then there are the next 3, which is empathy and basically training and the element of trust. Those are all sort of like more, they're less practical. They're more a part of mindset, but they are very important to frame a relationship that stands on compromise and not just on sort of like pulling on one way or the other. So everything has to be there so that it's balanced.
Okay, amazing. So one thing that I'm wondering like might work, and it sounds like maybe this is what you have already based on what you said. So this is kind of one visual that I like when there's like some things that are really important and then like some things that are either they just feel like they fit in a different category, and whether this can be a different level of importance, a different level of skill level, a different level of, you know, whatever it may be. And so I'm wondering if something like this where you put those like I'm almost picturing maybe 3 rings. Like at the very heart of it, we've got like the empathy and the trust, and then wrapping around that, we've got rituals and environment, and then wrapping around that, we've got like the supplementation and the nutrition. And so it's like, you know, it's kind of like a combination of these ones where you can also, I've done this with a client where we had these 3 rings, but the middle ring was actually a cycle. So it was like, we've got the heart, then we've got a cyclical process, and then we've got other concepts around it. So this is where you really can like kind of play with visuals to kind of layer different concepts together. So it's like, you know, putting like the cycle around one ring or putting something in the middle and then wrapping it around. But just the way you described it by saying like, oh, this is kind of at the heart of everything, you know, like this type of thing. I just pictured kind of like some sort of visual where it's at the heart, and then we've got it like kind of wrapped around. And then, I mean, like, oh my gosh, you know, it'd be so cute. I wonder if you could like make it like a cat head where it's like you've got like the middle parts like the trust, and then we've got something outside, and then like the protein and the supplements or the ears or something. Like I feel like you could do something like really cute like that if you wanted to. But that's where it's like you can kind of play around with like combining visuals to see like kind of what feels good. So how does that direction kind of land for you?
Yeah, the only thing is that I need to detach myself from seeing the word spelled out, and I need to spell it out by just saying what every letter means, maybe in a you know in a way that you can actually read it. But then the different elements, I can move them around as I wish so that they agglomerate properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know that ties actually in really well with Vicky's question here, and Bethany, I saw your question too. I'm not skipping it. So Vicky said, like, in terms of naming the framework, is it best to use an existing word and allocate each letter to the part of the framework rather than making up a word? And so, like, first of all, your framework doesn't have to be an acronym. Like, it can be really nice. It can be a really good, like, kind of tool around, you know, helping people remember to be able to say, oh, this is my RSVP framework. This is my respect framework, or like whatever it may be. But it doesn't have to be. That's totally fine. I have a ton of clients that don't have an acronym as part of their framework. So that's why I put it as one option here, but you don't have to pull it into an acronym. You could just say like, this is my, you know, an example I'm sharing from a client I have over here. I'll just see if I can zoom in. This is it's the Joyful SLP framework. So she supports speech language pathologists. And what we came up with together was this kind of Venn diagram of we recognize that in order for SLPs to feel joyful again in the practice, because that's what she really wanted to have, these were the kind of focus areas. And so we knew that they needed to have streamlined systems. We knew that they needed to feel really powerful in their practice, and they needed to have this intentional, you know, growth around seeking new skills and advocating for themselves. Within each of these kind of 3 big buckets, there are skills and abilities associated with it. So, you know, like the ability to structure a client session, the ability to identify a professional development pathway. But you can see there's no acronym here anywhere. So you don't need to have one. And often I find that we can end up coming up with these kind of convoluted things when we try to get too clever with the naming. And clear is always more important than clever. So if it works really nicely, if you can make it work without ending up being like, like I need to find a word that fits with I, and then you end up with some weird word in your acronym because you're like, well, I wanted to be able to spell this thing, then like you might be kind of like pushing it a bit too much. Whereas if you are like, oh, this fits really naturally, let's zoom out so we can see this all again, then that's totally fine. So you can, if you have a word that feels like it fits really nicely with what you're teaching, if you have an acronym you've already been using, that's great. But you can also just name the framework. Like I saw there's a like an EFT certification around tapping, and she just called it like the McDonald method because her last name's McDonald. So you can name it after yourself, you can name it after the outcome. There's lots of different things you can play with there. So then, yes, exactly, Paula, to your point, it doesn't have to like look like respect in the visual if you want to be able to give people a sense of like, why are we thinking about things this way? And so this is one of the things with our visuals, is not only is it like attention grabbing instead of just seeing a bunch of words on a page, but it helps us explain out the relationship or the thought process or the intentionality behind our frameworks. And so it's not just like, oh, I sat down and I dumped out like everything that I need, but I'm just going to like kind of group it into 5 pieces and now I have a 5-part framework. It's like, oh, what's my outcome? How do I get people there? How do I think about these things? What do I need to add to it? There's a lot more thinking and structuring that can go into it. And then just coming back around to Bethany's question here around the bottom row with the quadrants doesn't really make sense to me. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Absolutely. Let's zoom in here. So when we think about quadrants or axes, or for instance, like radiating circles, again, with axes. So with this, you don't necessarily have to have the arrows. I put those there to represent if you were thinking about things in terms of the spectrum or a range. So for instance, I've used this when I was talking about, not as a framework, more as a cog, more of like a queuing structure. I was talking about the difference between self-study programs all the way to live programs, so the amount of live elements in a program, and the depth of transformation. So like super deep transformation versus super high level transformation, to show the relationship between those two factors, to be able to represent like, a completely self-study course. I would recommend having a like kind of higher level, like surface level transformation, because the deeper the transformation gets, the more live elements you can really need to be supporting it. So this can be a way of showing these relationship between these kind of 2 different or 4 different factors, essentially. Or if you take the arrows off, it can literally just be creating focal areas. So here, for instance, with this like nesting or radiating concepts with themes, I did this with a client. We came up with this for her framework because we were looking at, she's a fashion futurist. So she works on like forecasting trends in like fashion and movements and things like that. And we recognize that the people she serves have 3 levels of impact. They have kind of like impact within themselves, or like, focusing on work within themselves. They have within their immediate circle, and then they have kind of like thought leadership. So that's what these different rings represented. But within her framework, there were 4 different focal areas. There was like the research methodology that was used. There was sustainability. There was like presentation skills and like how they actually share their thought leadership. And then there was also kind of like vision and values. And so within each level of the ring, there was like a focal area. So if we were over here in methods, we would be like, okay, kind of like introductory methods for just like solo work, methods for when you're working more with your colleagues, and then methods that help you on a large scale. Or if we were looking at like sustainability, it would be like sustainability for yourself and your energy to keep going, sustainability for your work with others, or sustainability for like helping and supporting people. So it was a way of kind of showing that there's these radiating levels of impact, kind of like going from like inner to outer, but also using kind of putting a quadrant over it to show how that shows up in the different focal areas. Let me know how that's resonating for you, Bethany, or if you want me to like explain more in depth there. And I feel like I've got a few more questions here. So Paula, I have another formula again, an acronym. I love acronyms, so it's easier to show visually. Yes, absolutely. So that's where you can kind of play around with it and you can kind of see, because sometimes I find with acronyms, we can end up choosing like really, really long words and then essentially coming up with like a couple words that all kind of say the same thing because we were trying to fit it into like an acronym, versus going like, oh, if I really distilled it down, there's actually only like 4 things I'm teaching. So if I like liberated myself from the acronym, I could have an even tighter framework. Or you can like keep it if it's like working and you're like, oh, each one of these pieces is super, super like very important. So again, nothing against acronyms, but you also don't need them at all. All right. And then Alex says, having wasted so much time trying to make my framework fit a convoluted concept I thought was very clever, which probably just confusing to customers, I can only agree that clear is better than clever. Yes, absolutely. Sometimes we're like, oh, especially if we can find themes within what we're doing, to be like, like Alex, I'm thinking like, oh, can I do something like chess related? Like, how can I come up with something really cool here? And then it's like, okay, I'm trying so hard to be clever that I have like completely lost the plot. Like it's not going to get translated out to my people. And so thinking about like, okay, how can we really make sure that this is like clear, easy to talk about, easy for someone else to talk about too, so that if someone was explaining it, like, oh my gosh, like I took this program and they taught this framework and it was like amazing. That is where it can be super, super helpful to be like, okay, is this clear enough? And when in doubt, you can always ask a friend or like talk it through with a partner or someone who has no idea like what you do or what you're working on to see like, how does this land? How does this resonate? Yes. Okay. So Bethany says, does the outcome need to be part of the framework, or do you see the framework as showing all the pieces that get you to the outcome? Okay. So absolutely. This is where you can kind of, it kind of depends on what the outcome is and how the concepts kind of relate to it. So for instance, some of them are more obvious than others. So like if we look at kind of a linear one, probably the outcome's going to be at the end here, because it's like 1, 2, 3, you're here. Or the interwoven concepts, it's like, well, when they all overlap, then that's the piece that's in the middle. So like the example I showed with like the joyful SLP. But a lot of these ones, it's actually the outcome is overarching. It would be what we would replace with like how I've labeled the visuals, because it would be like, this is the framework for here. Like this is the cyclical process to get you to this thing. Or like if we had like this one here, it would be, Geraldine's is called the world building framework. And so it's very much like sometimes it shows up in the visual and other times it doesn't, because it depends again on how those concepts relate to each other. As if we see something that's at its core, when they all come together, it creates this thing. Other times it's like, well, we need all of the pieces in place, and then that creates the framework. So yes and no, it depends. Okay, and then Raquel asks, can you sometimes only confirm this framework and develop it in working with people in groups? I just want to clarify, are you talking about like kind of testing your framework to see like, does it work? And you need to kind of work with multiple people opposed to being able to develop it one-to-one. You're welcome to come like off mute if you would like, or you can type in the chat. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, it's a question because I'm a teacher and I know that we can have these ideas in our mind and place them in an order that makes sense. And then we have to face the student and face the reality of whether or not what we've put here actually makes sense in the way that we've placed it, whether it's linear or not, right? So I wonder sometimes, can you sometimes create something and then go and see, like, is this, going to work in this way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think a lot of the times I recommend like creating a framework based on experience that you already have and drawing from. Like, I wouldn't say like, this is something that drives me absolutely bonkers that we see in like the online marketing space. They're like, you don't need an audience, you don't need anything. You can just like whip together this experience and like whip together a framework and a course and whatever. It's like, nope, you should be drawing from something. So I have a feeling that there are probably already elements and pieces, like for instance, you've seen where like, okay, through my work with students, I'm noticing I'm doing these things again and again and again, or I've seen these patterns, or like these are the themes or the action steps or that. And then from there, we can also take it one step further, which kind of leads me into like my next pieces to talk about is how do frameworks show up in our offer ecosystems and in our programs. And that is for some programs, not all, it can be helpful to have assessments where we think about what does each of these concepts look like as a skill or an ability. So if I had to define it to say, this is the ability to blah, blah, blah. So like coming back to Paola's example, like this is the ability to build bonding rituals with your cat. It's like, how will I know they have that ability? What does that ability, like a 10 out of 10 of that ability look like? What does a 1 out of 10 on that ability look like? And by asking ourselves these questions, even before we've engaged with, kind of like stress testing our framework with people, this can already help us because we can go like, oh, well, like, is there an ability there? Like, is there a skill associated with this? Like if I had to, and it can depend on which way your brain works best. What I find helps me when I think about frameworks is if I had to certify someone in my framework, what would I need to see from them to say, I'm confident that you have these, I can say, here's the Emily Walker framework. You can go share this out in the world. Like, I believe in you. What abilities would I need to say? If that doesn't quite jive in your mind, you can also think about like with my students or with my people or with my clients, how would I say that they have got this framework? What abilities do they have? How are they thinking differently? How are they feeling differently? And so by kind of working through that can help us kind of in like a theoretical sense, start thinking about like, how would this framework land in real life? Because if you're like, oh, and then I brought it into my students and there's no freaking way they have those abilities, or actually in order to get that ability, they would need to have like these other things that I totally missed. And at the same time, you're like 100% right. Until we actually take this and start engaging with real humans, we're not going to know how it lands, because we are so close to our subject matter expert or our expertise that sometimes it just makes so much sense to us. And then we start explaining something and people are like, what? And we realize that we've missed so many pieces, or something's not as clear, or we're like, yeah, no, check out this visual. And they're like, okay, this doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah. And so that's where like giving yourself
in a one-on-one, it feels easy to clarify that, but in a group, it's like, I think that's where the refining of it really comes into play. But yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Such a great question. Okay. So before I carry on with a few other little pieces, I want to check in and see if we have any other questions kind of around this. Everything we've talked about so far, outcomes, concepts, skills, visuals. Okay, so Alex asks, should or could an effective framework include a what to avoid rather than a what to do? Yes and no. Like in general, if you're teaching what to avoid, you are kind of like, the flip side is you're teaching what to do. And if you're teaching what to do, you're kind of teaching what to avoid. I find it very like empowering to focus on like what to do instead. So like if they are avoiding something, what are you teaching them to do instead? So like, is it you want them to avoid one thing by doing another? Thanks so much for Kyle. It's great to have you here. So are you like having them fill that ability with something else? Are you giving them a skill and ability to identify like mistakes that are coming their way or potential pitfalls? This is where I like to kind of think about like, what does that like avoidance mean? Like, how will we know they're avoiding it? Which can seem really like kind of silly because you're like, well, then they're not doing the thing. Like that's how they're avoiding it. They're like not doing this. But it's like, are they able to identify the mistakes? Are they able to choose a different path? Are they able to do this, that, or the other? I just find in general, it's helpful to keep it all in the same frame. So either keep it all in the positive of like, do this, do this, do this, do this, or keep it all in the like avoiding it, like the this, that, the other thing, so that you're not mixing it. Cause then it also helps keep the language really clear. If we can like parallel it where it's like, okay, all of these things are verbs, or all of these things are positive actions to take. You absolutely can kind of then create almost like a shadow framework of what happens if pieces are missing. So this is something you might be able to see on here. Let's zoom in so you can see it. This is where we were playing around with when you have these kind of Venn diagrams, and this language we were still working on is what happens if you have two things, but not the other thing. So this is where, if you've already shown like your like positive, really powerful framework of like, this is the amazing thing we're working towards, you can show what happens if they miss something. So for instance, like in this case, if they have a great system and they've got powerful practice, but they don't have intentional growth, then we notice that there's this risk of stagnating because that's just how things are done. But if they have, like they're working a lot on their intentional growth and they've got good systems, but they don't have a powerful practice, then they're not necessarily serving their clients to the fullest potential. So this is where you can kind of showcase, like if there's little like gaps or little things that like, if you miss part of the framework, what is the consequence? Now this, can show up, let me just move back over here so we can see other visuals. This could, for instance, show up in if we're doing kind of like building concepts where if something's missing, then obviously we can tell we've got shaky foundations, or if we skip a step, then like, this is why it's important. Or if we don't have something at the core of everything, then we're kind of like empty. So there's ways of showing like voids or negative pieces, but in general, it's a lot more motivating. It's a lot more empowering to like focus on the kind of more positive. How does that land for you, Alex? We gotta make sense. Great, amazing. Okay, so with the time that we have left, and it's okay if we go a little bit over if other people have questions, don't worry too much about that. I just want to talk about what does it actually look like to take this framework and like, how do we use it? How do we show it in everything that we do? So often I find what's taught online is it's just like you have a 5-part framework and you want to create a course. Therefore, you're going to have a 5-module course. Each module is going to be a piece of your framework. You don't have to do that. There are so many other ways of bringing your framework out into what you do. And so the first thing I want you to do is think about all of your offers, all of the work that you do as an ecosystem that flows together and fits together. And so whether you start with just one program, whether you have one-to-one services, whether you have self-study materials, whether you have your blogs or your content, all of it fits and flows together. And so again, this is where you get to have fun, you get to play, you get to do things in a way that feels really, really good to you. Where, for instance, for some people, it might be like if you have a linear process, you might have a one course that focuses on step 1, and then step 2, 3, 4 is done in your one-to-one work. Or you might have one offer for each element, or you might have a program that wraps around all elements. You might have a framework that can actually show up in different ways at different levels of depth that in multiple different offers. So if you have kind of like this is my framework for being a powerful mindset coach, and in your kind of entry level course or entry level program, you kind of teach it like skill level 1, but then in a mastermind, you bring it into skill level 2 or something like that. So this is where you really get to have fun. And when you're thinking about your framework, you can really play around with like what feels good for how I want to diffuse this out into my ecosystem. So Bethany asks, what if you don't offer everything in your framework yet? Part of my outer circle is nutrition, but I don't teach that yet. That's totally fine. That is 100% fine. This is something I'm doing with a client right now where we mapped out their offer ecosystem and we came up with, I think there's going to eventually be about 5 courses between like mini toolkits and larger group programs and a couple other things. It's totally okay to know that like, this is coming. And you can even say that if you're like, okay, like the outer circle is nutrition, but let's say you're marketing the kind of other stuff or you're talking about it, you can say, yeah, nutrition's really important, coming soon, join the wait list. I'm going to be talking about this great. If you want to learn more, like message me. So not only can you kind of start to like gauge out people's interest in that, maybe build a wait list, kind of play around with it. That is totally fine. Now, if you are planning, like you're like, I have no interest in ever talking about nutrition. I'm assuming that you do because it said yet, but like, it's also okay if you're like, I don't actually teach that because I know it's really important, but the way that I teach it is go find a certified nutritionist or something like that. You know, like sometimes we have things where like, I know, oh, 1 second, sorry, cat. I just got these baskets and Toulouse is determined to go into them, but I don't know if you can see this cat's very large. And so he's going to break them all. So he doesn't get to go in the baskets. Anyway, as I was saying, you absolutely don't have to teach everything ever or right away. So sometimes we can feel like, oh my goodness, I don't actually have, like, I can't talk about this until I have all the pieces out there. No, you can go ahead as long as you tell people where to find things or roughly when it's coming, or you can kind of point them in the direction of like, go to this waitlist page or sign up here or do this. That's totally fine. And I'm sure in other ways, you probably are starting to like talk about nutrition and plant that seed. And when you're ready, you'll be able to know like, okay, this is the offer. Like this is what feels really, really good. Great question there. So I'm just going to talk about a few more little things and feel free to just pop any last kind of questions or anything like that into the chat. But really, as we're thinking about where can we infuse our frameworks into the work that we do, I kind of mentioned this a bit before, but also for some frameworks, and not all, because you don't need to do this for every little thing, it can be really powerful to have assessments or check-ins kind of around the skills associated with your framework. So this is, for instance, I have a client who has a leadership framework where we know there's specific skills and abilities that she wants her leaders to have these check-in points. And so we actually built out a rubric to be able to say, like, what does this skill look like if it's a 2 out of 5? What does this skill look like if it's a 4 out of 5? To be able to give people a sense of, where am I actually at with this ability? What's my skill level? Where do I need to focus? Where do I need to grow? So this can be a really powerful way of helping people recognize, like, not only the growth that they've experienced through what you're teaching and what they're learning from you, but also where they need to grow and where they need to focus. So we can build in those kind of assessments or check-ins into our programs. We can also look at using our frameworks as orienting and anchoring structures in our programs. So right in the welcome, right in like everything that we're doing, saying like, hey, welcome to this program. Here's the goal. Here's what we're going to be focusing on. This is all about, my signature framework. This is what we're going to be doing. And so, obviously for programs where you're leading them through the whole framework, it's a lot easier because you can go, here's the whole framework. Here's what we're doing. But I'm thinking, for instance, for you, Bethany, if you had like a program and you're like, well, we're not talking about nutrition, you could kind of have whatever visual it is and have the nutrition circle grayed out and the other circles in like bright colors or whatever your brand colors are. So you can say like, this is my signature framework for complete like holistic health and wellness. This is what this course is focused on. We're not talking about this. You're always allowed to set the scope. You're always allowed to say, I'm talking about this and not that. So you can use it as an orienting, anchoring structure, both at the beginning and throughout your program. You can say, now we're here. Remember, like, if it's a linear process, you could absolutely like, now we're on step 3. Hey, remember how I told you there are 5 steps? This is where we are. The more you bring that visual back to like help people orient, to kind of know where they are, to know what they're focusing on, whether it's linear and you want to say, now we're on step 3, or you want to say like, hey, remember how I told you there are 4 pillars? This lesson, we're actually really drawing on that mindset pillar. Oh, in this lesson, we're really going to be doing this type of thing. You can bring it in so many different ways. And again, it's going to help solidify people. It's going to give them that structure so they feel safe and they feel held. So very much like you can use that again and again and again. Okay, I feel like I've talked your ear off. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I just love to open it up, the last little bit that we've got going on here, for any other questions that have come up, anything else you want to ask. It can be about frameworks, or it can be about like courses, programs, group programs, certifications, launching, marketing, all that stuff. Really, the floor is yours. You're welcome to use the raise hand feature, or you can just like type in the chat. I see Alex says, do you cover frameworks in any of your courses? So yes, I do, because I'm going to be building a brand new little mini course that everyone in the incubator is going to get access to around designing signature frameworks. So Alex, for you, by the time you start in the incubator, there's going to be something there that's going to walk you through, excuse me, losing my voice, it's going to walk you through designing your framework. So for anyone who's like, ooh, I want help with this framework, and I really want to like bring it through into a scalable, life-changing program, now's a great time to get into the incubator for sure. Okay, Paula, you raised your hand. Yes, go for it.
Sorry, I just typed it into the chat, but yes. So basically, I am outlining and building my course, which is like it's coming soon, and this is really zooming into the slice that regards the supplement, but it takes also from other elements of my framework, because the trust has to be there for this to happen. Like, this is about med time and making it easy both for the cat and for the guardian, and also making sure that you can monitor your cat's health at home so that you can save on vet bills. You don't need to keep going back and forth, because you can basically monitor the basic parameters. So this also takes from my framework but it's sort of like, it's sort of separate. Like it takes from my framework bits and pieces, but it sort of exists as a standalone, where I'm thinking of opening my membership for content that is strictly on my framework and fills in the slices in giving training on how to build the skills. Now, I think they should exist as two different things, even though they both interact with each other, I think. And the second thing would be, how do you actually get to assess people when they get the skill? Because what you said before was very interesting, that every element is a skill, which is great. And it's, yeah, it's really a sort of aha moment. But how do you go from, yeah, I know this is the skill, but how do I assess it? Because there is so much in that slice. And how do you assess that they know, like, oh, you know, how do you know? And how do you say yes and, you know, give them a badge or something? So how do you make that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I love the idea of you kind of pulling out that slice to have like that very specific, very like that is the thing that, like, I mean, like you said, giving like supplements and pills, like it's stressful. So it's a thing that people need. And I love that you can show like, this is like one element of how I think about things. And it does kind of sound like those other elements of your framework show up in that, even if it's on like a micro context, but you're like, you still have to have empathy and trust and like a good environment and blah, blah. So I wouldn't be surprised if the whole framework is there. It's just more, the context is more on the supplementation. Absolutely. So when it comes to like, how do we actually assess? This is where like, I'm a huge fan of rubrics, because instead of it being like pass fail, it's like, it focuses on development and growth and being able to show, you know, first of all, we want to look at what is the ability associated with it. So being able to say, like, what are the skills? And so what we can do is we can start, it's always easier to start broad, like just like dump it all out to be like, okay, if I had to list every skill and ability I think is associated with this part of the framework, what would it be? And then from there go, okay, are any of those kind of the same thing? Like I can kind of merge them together. Are any of those like not really that important? And then from there, ideally, I like to get down to kind of like 3, like the most important. We don't want to get to the point where it's just like so many things, because then again, it just starts to feel really like heavy and convoluted. So from there, we can ask ourselves, like, you know, whatever scale you want to use, for simplicity's sake, we'll say 5. What does like a 5 look like in this ability? Is it like they do this effortlessly, there's no stress, there's ease, they feel confident, they can do this, that, or the other? What does a 1 look like? Like, ooh, like they're missing this mark, they're stressing the cat out, they're, you know, getting bitten and clawed and scratched, like whatever it is. And then you can kind of define the 2, 3, 4. And what you can do like practically in your course is you can let there be a self-assessment where you kind of show them the rubric and say, like, where do you think you fall? Because, you know, for all of us on this call, for the most part, I think, you know, I think Alex, you have some younger learners, but for the most part, we're working with adults. And even with younger learners, self-assessment is so powerful, because we're usually really honest. Often we're too harsh. We're like, oh, I'm like a 3. And you're like, you're totally a 5, like you're okay. So it's really, really powerful to give people that opportunity to say, like, this is not punitive. I'm not giving out A+. I'm not going to send you to the principal's office. This is for your learning. So here's how we describe, this is what like flawless looks like at this skill. This is what needs some help looks like at this skill. And where do you feel like you fall? And then being able to say to them, if you're a 3 and below, go back and rewatch these videos, practice, do the stuff. If you're above, you can go here. So being able to kind of empower them to reflect on their own learning and then tell them kind of where to go. Obviously, in more like high touch programs, we can do this with them, you know. So in certification programs, we see this a lot, where it's like, I'm going to sit down and do this assessment with you. I want to make sure that like I know where you're at. But for self-study programs, lower ticket offers, a self-assessment is totally great. Yeah,
that's great, because you can create challenges and you can create prompts through the learning process where they can. I wanted them to practice some of these things, but obviously it takes time to get to the end. So having levels allows to practice enough to have a level, and not they can get to 10 in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
because, you know, peeling your cat takes time to practice, but they can get to a level where they can do other things. So that gives me a lot to think about in terms of how to create these challenges that go through the course. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Okay, and Vicky says, presumably it's okay to have a short framework so it's memorable, but then there's more modules in the course. I think my framework will be 4 to 5 key elements, but my course is 8 modules. Yeah, that's totally fine. My kind of thing when I'm looking at courses and dividing things up into modules is sometimes we divide modules and lessons because we can see there's themes and there's categories and there's concepts and they obviously go together. Other times it's because we want to make sure that it is manageable for our learners. So I'm like, in general, I am a huge fan of trying to keep your lessons under 7 minutes, like 5 to 7 minutes in length. And I'd rather you have more lessons with little bite-sized action steps than like epically like 20, 30-minute long lessons, because that's going to be super overwhelming and it's going to be super like hard for people to get through it. Similarly with modules in general, when I think about a module break is if it feels like there's starting to be like too many lessons in one module, because roughly a lot of people will do a module in one sitting. They'll kind of go, this is my focus. I'm going to do like a module a week, or I'm going to do a module each time I sit down. It kind of represents this like natural. It's like when you're reading a book and like you're like, okay, I'm just going to finish this chapter. Like, you know, I'm sure there's like people out there who are like, okay, I can stop in the middle of the chapter. I'm not one of them. I need to get to the end. So it's a similar thing by having like smaller bite-sized manageable modules. It makes it a lot easier. And this is where, again, if you have a short framework, and let's say you have maybe 1 or 2 modules before you get into the framework, or you kind of have the framework in the middle and then there's a bit others, or maybe you spend 3 modules on one part of the framework. That's fine. Just tell your people what you're doing. Like, this is why we're doing it this way. This is why we're talking about this. I know we said we're going to get to here and that's coming, but first we have to do these things. The more you let people know what you're doing, the more like trust you build, but also the more you're going to deal with that kind of like impatience of like, why do I have to learn this? It's like, okay, I'm telling you, like it's coming, you're going to be okay. Okay, so then let's see. And then Finette asks, do you cover the offer ecosystem in any of the courses? I'm working on some mini courses and I'd like to make sure they make sense together. Great question. So actually next month's course cafe is all going to be about offer ecosystems and like how I think about them and mapping them out. And then I'm going to be building a mini course for incubator members. And Finette, you'll get access to that because incubator members get all my courses that pop out. So you'll get that when it comes. And for anyone, again, it's such a good time to get into the incubator because there's so many good things coming. I'm going to be revamping all the curriculum. I'm going to be adding in trainings on frameworks and ecosystems and all that good stuff. So for people who have been thinking about maybe is now the time to come into this amazing group program, is a good time to get in. Okay, Bethany had to hop off. Vicky says, this is eye-opening. Some of my content is 50 minutes. Yes, yes. So this is a thing. And this is the reason this happens is because all the kind of top level people who are teaching about course creation in our industry have marketing backgrounds. They don't actually have education backgrounds. They haven't actually like worked as or with learning designers. And so they come from the lens of if we want people to see this as valuable, we want people to give us money, we need to just give them more and more and more. So that's where we see a lot of sales pages that are like 500 hours of video lessons and 30 pages of workbooks and 3,000 checklists and like whatever. And it feels like more and more and more when really, oh, Finette's hopping off. Thanks so much. It was so great to see you. When really the most valuable thing we can do is to make things bite-sized, short and sweet. And not only does this help with the kind of psychology of it, of like, you know, when someone opens up a lesson and it's only 5 minutes, they're way more likely to be like, okay, I could watch that. I've got 5 minutes. If you give someone an action step and it's like they could do that in like 10 minutes, they're more likely to do that versus if you give them like this, you know, huge thing like, okay, just go write your sales page now. They're going to go, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? If you go, this video is 50 minutes long, they're like, how am I going to do that? And there's also like a learning, like a cognitive retention piece where after about 15 minutes of direct instruction, so someone talking to you, your brain goes like, I've got it, I'm good. Like I can't take on anymore. I need time to implement. I need time to integrate it. I need time to kind of like sit with this or put it into practice. Oh, Georgina had to hop off. Thanks, Georgina. And so this is why especially for self-study programs, less than 10 minutes, ideally 5 to 7 minutes. For live calls, I don't know if you picked up on this, but about every 10 minutes or so, I was stopping. I was asking if you have questions. I was checking in with people. I was, giving you a break from just being like throwing all the stuff about frameworks at you. So this is, again, something you can use in your live pieces as well as in your self-study to go, am I giving people time to integrate? Am I giving time for people to sit with this? And even if you're like, oh, there's not like a direct action they can take yet, it can be as simple as a reflection question. What stood out for you from this lesson? What are you going to do differently? How are you feeling about things? How is this landing? How is this resonating? And then they can come into the next one. Okay, so Paula has one more question here. And then if anyone else has any other questions, you're also welcome to pop it in the chat and then we will wrap up for today. So Paula asks, and yes, of course, you can always ask all the questions. I love questions. I cannot possibly script my beta course as it has to be delivered end of March and it contains tons of deliverables. Do you condone courses where lessons are a bit more colloquial rather than pitch perfect? I love a colloquial lesson. I love an unscripted lesson because here's the thing. People want to learn from humans. And it's so funny because if we asked ourselves, like, what were some of my favorite learning experiences that I've taken? The ones that you love, that you resonate with, are probably the ones where the instructor showed up and was like, hey, let's chat, let's do this, let's do that. And as long as they delivered on the transformation, as long as they were clear and you could understand what they were teaching and they had some level of preparation, you were like, that was amazing. Versus the ones that are we see that they're perfectly manicured and they've got 8 spotlights on them and they're like, welcome to my lesson, I'm reading from a teleprompter and my cat's not ripping my headphones out of my ears. Yeah, sure, I'm sure it's fine, the production quality can be impressive, but I just remember in one of my courses called Group Call Confidence, it's all about delivering live calls with confidence. And I didn't realize it, but I had the unedited version of my welcome video up for months. So when you came into the course, it was like, hi, welcome to Group Call Confidence. I thought, I messed that up. I'm going to do that again. And then I was like, hi, welcome to Group Call Confidence. I'm so glad you're here. And I don't know how, it was months until someone messaged it. She's like, I don't know if this was intentional, but I just want to let you know that the video is unedited. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so mortified. I can't believe this happened. And she's like, actually, I really appreciated it. She's like, I really liked seeing the human of it all, because she's like, it gave me permission that I don't have to be perfect in my videos. And I was like, oh yeah, I kind of like that. So really the best advice I can give is if you create a structure so you know what you're teaching and having some notes. And what I really like to do when I'm recording is I break up my lessons into, again, little quantifiable chunks. So I've got 3 points. So I might do something like, hey, welcome to this lesson, blah, blah, blah. I keep the recording running. I check my notes. Okay, point 1, talk about it, keep the recording running, check my notes. And then in editing, I just chop out those breaks. So you're only ever talking for about 30 seconds to a minute without checking your notes. So you're less likely to get into that what was I saying? What was I talking about? I stumbled over my words. If you do stumble over your words, you can kind of redo just a little 30-second chunk. And then in edits, you can just put a little slide over it and cover up the edit or leave the edit because most people don't care. So that was my long soliloquy way of saying, absolutely, you do not have to be perfect at all. Welcome. And Evelyn asks, what do I record with? So it depends. Most of the time I record just like this on my laptop. I have a MacBook Air. I just use the built-in webcam. I recommend using some form of headphones just to reduce noise and have a little bit better audio quality. For some of my signature programs, I recorded with my DSLR camera. So I set that up and had a different type of mic. You don't need to do that by any means because the kind of sneaky thing that no one wants to tell you is there is a very high chance you're going to have to re-record your course after a year because you can spend all this time building it and creating it. And then as soon as you have people moving through it, you're going to be like, oh, I should have changed this. I should do that. They have questions around this. I need to add this in. Even for instance, I recorded my courses, I think 2 years ago, and I'm going to go I'm redoing them all this year because courses are living, breathing creatures. So I recommend choosing the recording equipment that feels the most natural to you. And as long as you have kind of relatively good quality audio, people are more forgiving if your video is not absolutely flawless. And then Paula says, I see people recording with just script, but I tried. It's like I need a degree to work it out. I find it super complicated, so I use Zoom. Absolutely. I have not actually used a script. I've heard it's great for editing, but I've never used it personally. Zoom is great, or even if you have a Mac, like QuickTime is totally fine. It's like built into your laptop and you can use that. The one thing QuickTime does that Zoom doesn't is it mirrors you or unmirrors you or something like that, which can be a bit distracting if you're not used to seeing your face look that way. But Zoom is great. Loom is great for like, video recording if you're screen sharing. So really like use what feels comfortable, because there's so many other things that come up around creating a course that you don't want to like, like put more tech on top of that. And
sorry,
go ahead.
the script it has this function where you can actually see, because it takes the transcript of whatever you're saying. When you have the video in front of you and you're speaking and you see the text, if you say something that you don't like, you can actually edit the text and the software automatically takes it out of the video. So it's actually really amazing. But, honestly, I look at it and I try different things and I just can't work it. Therefore, I just need to use something else. But yeah, thank you. You took a weight off my shoulders. Not having to be perfect and read it from a teleprompter, because I'll never get to the end of it. And then I have to film it again anyway. So probably so. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. And thank you so much, Vicki. Vicki says, huge thank you for this. This has been so much more valuable than a lot of the paid classes I've done. Oh, that means so much. I'm so grateful for all of you for coming and asking such great questions and just like really engaging. I love doing these course cafes. They're so much fun. So like I said, next month is all going to be about offer ecosystem design. And, if you ever have like specific questions or things you need support around, the course cafes are a great time to come, because even though they have a theme, you can ask me any and all of your course creation related questions. I am an open book. I love talking about this stuff. And of course, if you feel like you want deeper support, more guided support, the incubator is my signature group coaching program. It blends weekly group calls with one-to-one support. So you get one-to-one calls with me, as well as like review of your materials, access to my full curriculum suite. I truly think it's the coolest program out there, but I may be biased, but I just love the fact that you get to unlock rewards as you go along. It's such a great group of people. So if that feels like something you might be interested in, feel free to send me an email, or you can DM me on Instagram, emily.mwalker. Always happy to chat. But I think I will let you, the incubator is not on Kajabi. It is on Learn Plus by Thrivecart. So we have our calls on Zoom, and then all the curriculum and everything lives in Learn Plus. And with the incubator, it's an initial 4-month commitment, but you get lifetime access to all the courses. And I pretty much give you access to any courses that I create in the future as well. So like I said, there's some good things coming. We're adding in things around offer ecosystems, frameworks, certification program design. There's a bunch of really cool stuff coming. And yeah, the incubator is so good. So thank you so much, everyone. What a great call. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll be sending out the replay in the next couple of days. So if you want to go back and rewatch anything, that will land in your inboxes soon. Thank you. Thank you so much.